It doesn't mean anything. It was just sex. The loud words sounded like a shot in the silence of the room, filled with the feeling of something irreversible. There was a tension in the air, so thick that it seemed you could touch it. Kurt didn't flinch, didn't look away. His eyes sparkled with a cold determination that I'd only seen in him a few times before. This look burned right through me, as if it wanted to take me apart into pieces, examine my essence, find something that I, perhaps, had not yet seen in myself. "Deborah, you will regret your words." His voice sounded low and harsh, and turning sharply, he headed towards the door. The door slammed behind him with such force that the walls rang like stretched strings. As soon as he disappeared beyond the threshold, I was seized by a fit of chilling fear. I knew that he would never cause me physical harm. Kurt was always reserved. He despised rudeness and rage. But this parting promise, which sounded almost like a sentence, made my fingers go cold. Kurt didn't say the words in anger in vain. If he promised something, be it an oath or a threat, it was always a deliberate, precise strike at the very weak point at which he had already aimed. I suddenly realized that he didn't just leave, slamming the door in anger. He took something important with him and will probably return when I'm least ready. My husband of 10 years somehow found out about my 6-week affair with John, a work colleague. He showed me pictures of us kissing and leaving the hotel room. This is where our quarrel began, which ended with his statement. I took the phone and tried to call him. Apparently, he turned it off because the call went straight to voicemail. "Kurt, please come back. We need to talk. I understand that you are angry, and rightfully so. But I still love you. I made a stupid mistake. Please call me." Yes, it was a stupid mistake. I started an affair with a colleague, John Putnam. He was a middle manager, confident, slightly cocky, a man who was used to attention and knew how to attract it. I was just an office worker, one of those who was used to remaining in the shadows. I understood that our casual glances, these light, almost invisible touches and fake jokes were crossing a dangerous line, but I still couldn't stop. There was something exciting about it, something that made me feel alive. We'd been flirting for the past 2 years, gracefully, casually, almost with an innocence that was only visible on the outside. You know how it happens. A simple phrase at first glance does not convey anything reprehensible, but the look, intonation, and slight tilt of the head give it a depth that is difficult to ignore. There was something secret between us, barely perceptible, but this only made it more attractive. Every day, these fleeting moments filled with sexual tension only intensified. The smiles became longer, the gaze more piercing. He winked at me, made playful, ambiguous remarks, and I realized that I was responding to this. My heart beat a little faster. The blood began to warm under the skin. 2 months ago, everything escalated, as if an invisible barrier holding us back suddenly disappeared. We left the office at the same time after a long day, and John suggested we get a drink. "Okay, one cocktail won't hurt. Don't think that after one cocktail you will be able to take advantage of a girl." I laughed, but my voice no longer sounded so light. This carefree remark was just a cover. Something was seething inside, not letting go. He looked at me, and in his gaze I read something more than just a desire to joke. That first cocktail, deceptively light, was followed by others 3 and then 4. We laughed as if no one was around. His hand covered mine from time to time, lingering a little longer than would be appropriate. A warmth came over me, which I did not attribute to the alcohol. I liked the attention, his manners, the self-confidence with which he carried himself, the feeling that I was special and interesting to someone. With each meeting, this feeling became stronger, taking me further and further from my usual life, until I noticed how I was on a fine line. I can't say that Kurt ignored me or took me for granted, and that would be a bad excuse. Yes, he worked hard, but at home he always put me first. I was just stupid and selfish. The first time it was exciting, like when you were a kid stealing candy because of an argument with your best friend. After this, it was as if a Pandora's box had been opened. What bad could happen? Over the next 6 weeks, John and I explored each other. I was always a little reserved with Kurt. I was afraid that he would think that I was promiscuous. And with John, there were no restrictions at all. I allowed him what I didn't allow my husband. We both knew it was just a fling. He was also married, and none of us wanted to change anything in our lives. However, now this may no longer be in my power. Kurt is not one to forgive betrayal. We'll have to work hard to get it back, if at all possible. We were married for 10 years, a whole decade, during which we managed to weave thousands of invisible threads that connected us as a couple. This was the first marriage for both of us. First marriage. How strange that I even think like that. When we first got married, it seemed like it would be forever, that we were two parts of one whole, like in novels where everything is predetermined. But now I feel a latent anxiety nesting in my heart, as if the shadow of a possible end had settled somewhere deep in my soul, not giving me peace. I'm starting to think that our marriage may be on the verge of ending. We both did not rush into a serious relationship. We waited for a long time for our person, someone with whom we would feel in complete harmony. He was 30, I was 28. We met at the stage when we both already knew what we wanted. Before we met, each of us had a long-term relationship, but no matter how attached we were to our previous partners, not one of them became someone we would like to see next to us all our lives. But when we met, we immediately felt that there was something special between us. We looked at the world from a surprisingly similar point of view. We had a common desire for life, for adventure, for learning new things. We turned out to have so much in common. We both adored the same music, films, TV series. We could spend hours discussing old films, arguing about our favorite bands, finding something magical in it, and only ours. We were both hungry for travel, but not the type to just lie on the beach in the hot sun, not moving for hours. We were drawn to new discoveries. Every vacation turned into an active exploration of a new city or country. We loved ancient architecture, those carved facades, cool stone halls, elegant details left by craftsmen a century ago. Museums became places for us where we wandered for hours, studying paintings and artifacts, captivated by the stories behind the glass. And when we were closer to nature, the soul literally sang. We hiked through the forests and mountains, clutching trekking poles in our hands, enjoying the smell of pine trees and the chirping of birds. We rode our bikes along winding country roads, racing through sprawling fields in the wind, feeling how every movement strengthened our connection. Sometimes we just went out of town and drove in a car, watching green hills, small villages, farms with silent houses, and sunrises ready to illuminate everything around us. We lived in these moments. It seemed that our love would always be like this, bright, rich, and full of small but significant discoveries. If Kurt does divorce me, and I fight to the last, it will be unbearably difficult for me to find someone who would suit me as well as him. There are too many things that connect us. We have experienced too much together. All our moments, joyful and difficult, our habits and small rituals, this is all that makes us one. Would anyone else be able to understand me the way Kurt did? Accept me with all my quirks, support me when I'm having a hard time, or just be there when I need a silent presence? I felt lost, like I was on the verge of a cliff. Oh, why did I do this? I said out loud, and my voice trembled, scattering in the empty room. How could I be such a fool? It seemed that these words reflected the entire depth of my despair and regret. I couldn't believe that I had brought us to this point. It seemed that between us stood the shadow of my mistakes, which could no longer be crossed out or erased. In a panic, I reached for the phone again, hoping that this time he would answer. With each dial tone, his heart squeezed with a painful lump, as if this was the last chance to change something, to return his voice, to hear that everything was not lost. But with every second, the beeps seemed quieter, colder, and finally the call was interrupted. Kurt still didn't answer. We never decided to start a family. Both seemed to be waiting for some sign, the right moment, but the years passed, and each time the conversation about it remained somewhere in the background, as if it was naturally postponed until later. I think we made this decision through our silent inaction. Over the years, I realized that I might even be glad about it. We had no children who would have to watch our breakup, no little lives who could be affected by the divorce and remember it as a painful wound for the rest of their lives. We lived for each other, and it seemed simple enough, not burdened by concerns about the future of someone else. You can't think like that, I told myself, interrupting the flow of anxious thoughts, as if trying to curb my own fears. There will be no divorce. We can handle it. I hugged myself with my arms, sitting on the sofa in an empty room, and turned my gaze to the phone lying next to me. It was motionless, but I seemed to feel its invisible weight, as if the phone itself carried the promise that it was about to ring, and Kurt's voice would be heard on the other end, saying that he had changed his mind. I tried to drive away the tension, to calm myself, but each ring, while waiting for the call, seemed painfully long, reverberating somewhere in my chest with either hope or fear. I looked at his latest messages. Now I realized that I missed important signs. Kurt, when will you be home? Me, I decided to have a drink with the girls. I'll be there in an hour. Kurt, don't do anything I wouldn't do. Me, you know me. How could I have missed this? He already knew everything 2 weeks ago. Again, I behaved like a fool. It was about 9 o'clock on a Friday night, and I was trying to imagine what Kurt was doing now. He must have already found some hotel and stayed there for the night to avoid returning home and talking to me. Maybe he wanders around someone else's impersonal room, sitting on a hard chair by the window, looking at other people's lights behind the glass and thinking about what happened between us. Perhaps his thought returned to me, just as mine returned to him, but each time this silent dialogue was broken off. However, deep down I still hoped that he would return. Even if he just came in and sat down next to me, even if he came to finally put an end to it, I would still prefer this to the silence that was tearing me apart from the inside. I wanted to talk, to explain, to at least try to explain, but every moment of ignorance seemed like an eternity. I called him again and again, checking my phone, waiting for an answer, even a short message. I didn't pick up the phone until 10:30, but every time I heard only the voice of the answering machine, which sounded too alien and formal. It seemed as if he had frozen his presence in my life, leaving me alone with emptiness. The phone ended up lying next to me on the sofa cushion, and I remained sitting on this very sofa, staring at one point. The house was plunged into the silence of the night. Only rare sounds from the street broke through the closed windows, but they did not bring me peace. Kurt had no intention of returning that night, but I decided to wait anyway. Lying there, unable to sleep, I replayed my life in my head. I had a few boyfriends in high school, but nothing serious. In fact, I didn't have sex until college. I didn't want to commit myself. In college, I was not promiscuous, but I led an active student life and made many sexual connections. Every new experience taught me something, something about life and something about myself. By the time I graduated, I already understood who I was and what I wanted. After graduating from university, I dated several men for 2 years, but none of them became the one for me. True love came to me only with Kurt, and I realized this already in the first month of our acquaintance. We dated for 2 years before we got married. During this time, I managed to see the real Kurt, recognized him in a variety of situations, both in joy and in difficult moments. He had nothing to hide, he did not put on masks, did not try to appear better than he was. Kurt always said what he thought, and was not afraid to show his weaknesses and fears. This quality made him special in my eyes. He was like an open book, on the pages of which his character was clearly revealed. A man with strong convictions, sincere and straightforward. When Kurt said something, his words weren't empty. They turned into promises and then into facts. I saw how he kept his word, no matter how difficult it was. Kurt was a man who would do anything to achieve justice, especially when it came to those around him. If someone acted dishonestly or unfairly, Kurt could turn into a ruthless opponent. Several people experienced his anger on themselves. He did not resort to threats, did not get angry openly, but his determination instilled fear in people. He was not vindictive. His rage was not fueled by malice. He simply stood by his principles. He believed in justice and honesty, and in his eyes these were unshakable, important truths. That is why now I so desperately wanted to earn his forgiveness. Kurt was not a person who easily forgives betrayal, nor was he one who turns a blind eye to deception. I knew that his forgiveness would not be easy to obtain, but I was even more aware of how important it was. At 11:45, I tried to call him again, to no avail. It was going to be a long night. I must have dozed off somewhere in the middle of this endlessly long night, because I woke up from the harsh, bright sunlight that was already making its way into the living room through the cracks in the curtains, illuminating the room with a soft but merciless morning light. I slowly got up from the sofa, feeling a heaviness in my body and a slight ache, traces of a night of waiting, spent in anxiety and insomnia. I paused for a moment, staring at the phone as if it alone might answer my questions, but the screen remained cold and blank. No call or message from Kurt. Stumbling from fatigue, I headed to the bedroom, where all our things reminded me of him, of our usual routine, of quiet evenings and intimacy that I had once taken for granted. With desperate hope, I approached the bed, trying to convince myself that perhaps he had returned home in the middle of the night, quietly, so as not to disturb me. But looking inside, I saw that the bed remained untouched. The sheets were smooth, the pillows lay neatly in their places, as if no one had ever slept here. The feeling of emptiness painfully pinched my chest, but I decided to check the second bedroom. It was once intended as a guest room, but was used so rarely that, in fact, it was there more for show. I opened the door, peering into the room, and again there was a complete absence of traces of his presence. Everything remained in the same order as it was yesterday. Kurt didn't come back. It was 8:30 Saturday morning. I picked up the phone again and tried to call him, but still without success. I didn't know what to do. All his relatives lived far away, several hours away, and it is unlikely that he went to them. I didn't want to call our friends because I couldn't explain why I was looking for him and why he left. All that remained was to wait for his return. Time dragged on painfully long, but Kurt never showed up. I started to worry. I called the police, but they didn't help me, saying that no accidents had been registered about a person with his description. I called the hospitals, but I didn't find any traces there either. Kurt was just hiding somewhere, avoiding me. Perhaps he won't come back at all. He didn't need suits for his job. He was a maintenance manager in a factory where he wore a uniform, changing on the spot. So all he needed was a pair of jeans and a few t-shirts, which he could easily buy anywhere. The day dragged on endlessly. I tried to do house cleaning so he would know how much I appreciated him taking care of our home. Our house. And technically it's true. When Kurt came up with the idea of buying this house 9 years ago, I was completely against it. It was an old wreck, dark and depressing, with a rickety veranda and faded walls, located in an area that at the time seemed dangerous and cluttered to me. The facade was painted with faded colors, windows that had not been repaired for a long time, and weeds instead of a lawn. All this did not inspire me with the slightest desire to live here. It seemed as if the house had forgotten its past splendor and was waiting for someone to tear it down. However, Kurt stubbornly stood his ground. He said that he saw something more in this house than I did, and that if we got down to business, we could make it a cozy place for our family. To persuade me, he took it upon himself to pay the mortgage and all utility bills, leaving me with only the purchase of groceries and small items. He persuaded me for a long time and with sincere persistence, assuring me that we could breathe new life into this old building. I saw the fire in his eyes, his passion, his determination, and finally I gave in, conceding to him in this matter. From the first day, Kurt invested not only money, but also his soul into the house, working tirelessly, giving his all every evening after work and almost all weekends. He replaced the rickety porch, repaired the covered staircases, strengthened the walls, and relaid the old floors. He turned each room into a small work of art, doing everything with his own hands, from restoring windows to creating built-in furniture, from picturesque wall panels to sophisticated lighting. This house became his creation, a reflection of his character and perseverance. Over time, I began to see things that I didn't notice at first. Kurt foresaw changes in the area. After a few years, people came here who, like him, were looking for something authentic and calm, but with a future. New shops, cafes, and landscaped parks have appeared. Now the area has become prestigious, and many sought to move here, where life was in full swing, but retained an atmosphere of comfort and safety. And our house, with all the improvements Kurt had put into it, was now worth about 3 times what it was when we bought it. I looked around and saw traces of his work everywhere, large projects and small details. He was in all of this. I loved this man. Why did I do what I did? Saturday turned into Sunday, and then Monday came. I took the day off, hoping that I would be able to catch him in time if he decided to come back for his things. I called him at work and was told that he took the day off for personal reasons. If I had previously doubted the seriousness of our situation, I now realized it. Kurt never took days off except for our vacations together. Even when he was sick, he went to work, knowing how much they relied on him there. But at least I knew he was alive. That evening, around 6, Kurt walked through the door. I was so happy that I rushed towards him, but the expression on his face stopped me. "Oh, Kurt, I'm so sorry." "You'll regret it," he replied. This was another one of his predictions, and it scared me too. "Well done to our judicial system," he said sarcastically, clenching his jaw and fixing a sharp gaze on me. "One person cheats, and the second is left with nothing as a result." His voice sounded cold and harsh, as if he was throwing out his bitterness and pain that had accumulated over these days. I shivered, wondering what he was talking about, but alarming guesses had already begun to flash through my head. "I met with a divorce lawyer today," he added, frowning at me. These words pierced me like a sharp blow. I felt my knees buckle and my heart clench painfully. My throat immediately went dry, and, struggling with growing despair, I said quietly, "Oh no, Kurt, please, don't get a divorce." I felt that my voice was trembling, and the words came out almost pleading. He snorted mockingly, looking at me as if I were a stranger. "We will not get divorced," he said sharply. "But the lawyer told me that you will probably get half of everything, my pension, our savings, and the house. In order to pay off your share, the house will have to be sold, understand? You'll have to sell it and then divide the proceeds. But this won't happen. I won't let you sell the house after everything I've put into it, just so you get your share." His voice rang on the last word, and he turned away sharply, as if he no longer saw the point in this conversation. I felt destroyed under the weight of his words, but at the same time, timid hope flared up in my soul. We didn't intend to get divorced. Despite his anger, his pain, and resentment, he did not want to go all the way, breaking our bonds. I was so happy to hear this, as if, amid the thunder of his accusations, I caught the quiet sound of forgiveness, albeit still unconscious, not fully formed, but making its way through all this pain. "Oh, Kurt, I know I can redeem myself. We can stay together, and I will show you how much I'm sorry and how much I love you." He didn't react to my words in any way. "This is how everything will be now," he continued. "We'll just cohabit. I will still pay my mortgage and essential utilities. You will pay for everything else. But it's always been like this," I said. "No, I mean absolutely everything else. You will pay for your car and insurance. You will also pay for any credit cards in your name yourself. I have already closed all joint credit cards and canceled them. I transferred the money from our account to a new one and will now pay my bills from there. We will remain married and cohabitate, each being responsible for himself and his own life." It could be worse, I thought. At least we will live together. Perhaps I can show him how sorry I am, and in time he will forgive me. With these words, he turned and walked into our bedroom. I didn't know whether to follow him. A minute later, he came out with an armful of clothes, carried them into the guest bedroom, and returned for a new batch of clothes. I just stood there and cried. Is this the beginning of the end? I thought. I started cooking dinner, and he came out of his room saying, "I'm not hungry, don't cook for me." Then he went back to the guest bedroom. His room, I thought, and had already mentally come to terms with the fact that we would now have separate bedrooms. How long will this last? It was a restless night, but at least my husband was home. When I got up in the morning, I noticed that he had already left. I also got ready and went to work. Thoughts about work were the last thing on my mind. John came over to my table and started a casual conversation, but I abruptly cut him off. He realized that something was wrong. "What's happened?" he asked. "I had the worst 4 days of my life." "Kurt found out about us," I said, lowering my voice. He looked terrified. "What is he going to do? Will he tell my wife?" "I don't know. He didn't say anything about it," I answered. "He told me almost nothing at all." "Is he going to divorce you?" he asked, clearly fearing the consequences. "He said he wouldn't get a divorce, but it doesn't seem like it will be like a normal marriage." "I'm glad to hear that," John said, clearly hearing only what he wanted. "It looks like if Kurt and I don't get divorced, his marriage won't be in jeopardy either. I never considered him such an egoist, but probably in his place I would also be afraid for my marriage." He gave me a tight smile and walked away. I again felt regret for what I had done. After work, I went straight home. I turned on the TV, but the screen remained dark. Our DirecTV was not picking up a signal. Nothing new. This happens from time to time. I called them and was told that the service was canceled this morning. I knew Kurt did it. I said I would call back later to reactivate the connection. I checked the Wi-Fi. The internet was also disconnected. But there was light and the house was warm, so they left the gas on. For this, I was grateful. If I want to restore the remaining services, I will have to pay for them from my salary. Apparently, I'll need to sit down and draw up a budget. You'll have to give up something. When Kurt got home, I mentioned the disconnected services. He replied, "And you will also need to switch to a different tariff on your phone before the 6th of December, when our current billing period ends." The forecast for December called for warmer weather than usual, but it looked like it was going to be a cool month at our house. On Thursday evening, when Kurt returned home, he was in a slightly better mood, and I decided to try to make light conversation with him. "Kurt, maybe we can go somewhere and have a quiet dinner," I suggested. He thought and answered, "Okay, I'll even pay, but just no talking about us and what happened. Neutral topics only." I agreed to everything, as long as we could somehow improve our relationship, even gradually. During dinner, I asked him about the day. They had a major machine breakdown at work, but thanks to Kurt's experience, everything was fixed in a couple of hours. By the end of dinner, I felt a little relief and even hope. We didn't fight or hurt each other, and maybe we can put this behind us. When we got home, I went to the bedroom to change into something more comfortable. Kurt took a beer and sat in the living room, staring at his phone. When I left, I asked, "Do you mind if I sit next to you on the sofa?" "It's too early for that," he replied sharply. I sank into the chair opposite him, feeling it give way softly under my weight, and just watched him as he sat immersed in his phone, dispassionately scrolling through his feed as if I no longer existed. At that moment, it seemed infinitely distant to me, as if we were on different banks, between which there was a deep crack. I studied his face, features that I knew to the smallest detail: a straight nose, slightly furrowed eyebrows, a thoughtful line of his mouth. How could I love this man so deeply and yet commit a betrayal that now destroys his trust? The bitterness of this contradiction squeezed my heart. How, knowing his principles, his character, did I still allow myself to do this? I couldn't find excuses. Even trying to find one seemed pathetic. Did I know then that I would destroy everything we built? And if it were him, if he allowed such a betrayal, I would not forgive. I knew this for sure. I most likely would not just kick him out of the house. The desire to take revenge, to punish for the pain that I now see in his eyes, would overwhelm me. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't believe I actually did it. It was as if the events were happening in someone else's life, as if I was a spectator watching my actions from the outside, but reality hit me in inevitable waves. I tried to understand what was driving me then. Frivolity, thirst for spice, a feeling of something new. Apparently, I didn't think at all. Neither about yourself, nor about him, nor about the consequences. I cherished the timid hope that, despite everything, we could fix what I had done. Like a tiny light in the middle of the darkness, this thought kept me afloat, preventing me from drowning in the depths of guilt and despair. I say we because I understood perfectly well. My determination alone is not enough here. In order to restore our relationship, we will both have to make efforts, otherwise this abyss between us will never shrink. Now I had to do everything possible and impossible, if necessary, to regain his trust. I had to prove my sincerity not with words, but with actions, showing him again and again that I was capable of changing, that my repentance was true. Kurt was a man for whom words carried weight, and I needed him to not only hear my apology, but also see that I was ready to fight for our future, that I was ready to do anything for this. But he also had difficult work ahead of him, because forgiveness is no less an effort than repentance. I knew that it would take a lot of strength for Kurt to find this step within himself. Not just to listen to me, not just to see my regret, but to really try to accept it, to let at least a grain of the old trust back into his heart. We both understood that it was impossible to return to the past, but to abandon it now, as if it were just a mistake, would mean destroying everything that we were. I wanted to believe that maybe, with time, he would be able to see my regret and pain as clearly as I see his suffering. After a while, he looked up and said with a slight grin, "I went to bed." I nodded, and when he left, I said, "Do you know that you can sleep in our bedroom?" "I know," he answered in a tone that made me feel worse than dirt. Obviously, we are still far from reconciliation. On Friday at work, I was at my desk when I heard some noise at the entrance. A couple of minutes later, John flew towards me, heading like a hurricane. "I thought you said your husband wouldn't say anything," he shouted. "My God," I exclaimed. "He didn't mention anything. I just got called for a divorce." "Crap," I whispered. "Now everyone will know about my affair with John. I will become the object of gossip throughout the office. How can I show up here now?" I started crying. "Why are you crying?" John snapped. "You said that your husband is not going to divorce you." At that moment, my boss came out of his office and said, "John, you need to leave. This is not the place for such conversations." John glanced at him, then turned and walked away. My boss didn't say anything to me. He just silently returned to the office. This day became the worst day of my life. Rumors spread instantly. Colleagues whispered behind my back. Some men even dared to invite me for a drink after work. By the end of the day, I couldn't wait to leave. I was glad that it was the weekend and that I wouldn't have to see them until Monday. When I drove home, my emotions were boiling. I couldn't believe what was happening. At home, Kurt was sitting in the living room and apparently had returned from work early. Seeing him, I felt a flash of rage. "What the hell did you do? Did you tell John's wife? You knew he was going to get the papers today. That's why you were in a good mood yesterday. You liked getting revenge, right? And now I feel like crap," I screamed. Kurt sat with a satisfied grin. "Do you even know that he has 2 children under 10 years old?" I said. He continued to grin. "This will destroy their family," I added. He was still smiling. "What were you thinking?" I asked defiantly. "Probably a lot more than you two thought when you slept with each other," he answered calmly. "Oh," I screamed, "you're pissing me off. Am I pissing you off? How would you feel if the person you swore your love to, with whom you entered into marriage, the person with whom you planned to spend your whole life, suddenly left and started sleeping with someone else, and repeatedly?" I ran into the bedroom, slamming the door. She threw herself on the bed, bursting into tears. I was furious with him and with myself. He's right. How would I feel? After lying there for about an hour and still sobbing, I heard the phone ringing. I didn't really want to talk to anyone, but I still looked at the screen. It was my sister Joan. I sat down, cleaned myself up, and answered the call. "Hello, Joan." "What's happening?" she asked in an alarmed voice. "Why are you asking? What's going on with Kurt? Is this some kind of joke?" "What are you talking about?" I asked. "Kurt just changed his Facebook status to in an open relationship." "What? Is it a joke?" she asked again. "Oh, Joan, I think I ruined my marriage." "What have you done?" she asked. "I had an affair with a colleague, and when Kurt exposed me, I said, it was just sex." "Oh, Deb, how could you do this?" "I don't know. I don't think I thought at all," I answered. "Is Kurt going to divorce you?" she asked. "No, he says that a divorce is unprofitable for him, because according to the law, he will have to sell the house and divide everything in half." That's why he said that we would just live together. Oh, Joan, I've ruined everything. Literally, she said. Do you need somewhere to live? No, Kurt moved into the guest bedroom. Oh, Deb, if it gets really bad, you can come and see me for a while. Thank you, but I want to try to save our marriage. For this, I need to be here. My offer remains valid. I need to talk to Kurt about his Facebook status. I hope he did it as a joke, but I don't think so. Well, you better persuade him to change it back, otherwise everyone will start discussing it. Call me if anything happens. I was furious. How could he do this? What was he thinking? I left the bedroom, ready to burst into reproaches. Did your lover call to see if you could meet him today? He asked with a sarcastic tone. No, it was my sister. She called to see what's going on because you changed your Facebook status to in an open relationship. Yes, I changed it. Why not? It doesn't mean anything. It's just sex. So I decided to take the opportunity and join this celebration of life. I stared at him, not knowing what to say. Has it really come to this? My heart was breaking. Silently turning around, I went back to the bedroom. Tears flowed again. What have I done? Our marriage may no longer be salvageable. Will I ever be able to fix this? I think I fell into a restless sleep because I suddenly woke up, lying on the bed, wrapped in twisted sheets, as if I had been caught in some kind of grab. I looked at my watch, 4:23 am. The darkness in the room was not complete. Moonlight made its way through the cracks in the curtains, flooding my side with a cold glow, and I felt uncomfortable from this dead silence, which seems possible only at dawn. I got out of bed and slowly went to the bathroom. Dim light filled the room, and I stopped in front of the mirror, as if trying to prepare myself for what I would see. The woman looking at me from the glass surface seemed alien to me, unfamiliar. I peered into her face and suddenly realized how his expression had changed. The makeup still left over from yesterday was smeared around my eyes like traces of tears and looked like a symbol of the chaos I had caused. But that was not the main thing. As if overnight, fatigue, bitterness, and something else were imprinted on this face, which gave him a haggard, aged look. The lines around the mouth became deeper, the gaze became empty and cold. I stood silently and looked at my reflection, remembering what I was like before. How could I let all this happen? How could she act so thoughtlessly, without thinking that Kurt would find out that everything we built together would collapse like a house of cards? Did I really value our promises with him so little, the vows we made to each other on our wedding day? Or did I just forget about them, letting the moment take over my mind? His fingers involuntarily curled around the edges of the sink as the same thoughts swirled in his head. Have I forgotten everything we had, everything that connected us? Our whole life, which until recently seemed so reliable, has it really turned out to be so fragile? I asked myself again the question I had been repeating for the past few days. Are we really done with him? Tears flowed down my cheeks again. I couldn't believe I was still able to cry. How can I fix everything? I asked myself. But I didn't know the answer, and I couldn't turn back time. I cleaned myself up, took off my clothes, and went to bed, but I couldn't sleep. I tossed from side to side, and finally, after about an hour, I stood up again and picked up the phone. I decided to see what Kurt wrote on Facebook. Having opened the application, I went to my page. Fortunately, there were no hints or comments that could publicly discuss my mistake or Kurt's status. I went to his page, and everything there was like neon lights. There were a lot of comments under his status. People wondered what these changes meant. Kurt didn't answer, letting his status speak for itself. One woman even wrote whether this was true, and if so, whether she could invite him for a drink. This woman worked with him. How symbolic, I thought. It all started with a drink between friends with John and me. Will she and Kurt end up in bed too? Will he have an affair? Why not? It's just sex. That was my attitude, right? When the situation turns around and you find yourself in someone else's shoes, it doesn't feel like that at all. But how can I demand fidelity from him if I myself did not correspond to it? I felt our marriage crumbling around me. Will I be able to restore it again? I started crying again, although it seemed to me that there were no more tears left. A person is approximately 60% water, but I felt that I had already cried more than I could. I must have fallen asleep again because I woke up at 9 in the morning. I got up, made myself a cup of coffee, looked around, and noticed that Kurt had left again. He didn't leave any note. Is it really going to be like this now? Two married people leading separate lives, not responsible to each other. I sat at the table, holding a cup of coffee, and thought about my life. I needed to find a way to fix everything, so I made a list. First, I need to talk to Kurt and let him know how sorry I am. Second, I need to show him that I still love him. Third, I need to give him a reason to trust me and want to try to repair our relationship. These three things were necessary to save our marriage. Kurt was out of the house all day, so we couldn't talk to him. How could I tell him how sorry I was if he wasn't willing to listen? How could I show him my love if he avoided me? Then I decided to start with the third point, give him a reason to trust me and try to improve our relationship. He came home at 11:30 p.m. smelling of alcohol. I wondered if he had spent time with the coworker who messaged him on Facebook. I asked him, "Where have you been?" I tried to ask the question without an accusatory tone, calmly. "Who cares?" he answered. "Now we don't have to report to each other." "Kurt, can we talk?" I asked, hoping that he would at least listen to me. "Too late to talk today and too early to discuss our relationship. Maybe next month," he replied. Looks like we're in for a cold December at the Coleman family home, I thought to myself. And so it was. I tried to show Kurt my love every day. I tried to tell him where I was going and who I would be with. I didn't know whether he appreciated it or considered it a sign of patronage, but I just didn't know what else to do. All this time I tried to attract him to me, to return our closeness, but every time I hinted at this, he refused me. In the second week of December, we received a call from Pauline Dwyer, a neighbor on our street. She asked if Kurt could help her with the plumbing. Pauline was about 30 and had two small boys. 2 years ago, she lost her husband due to a brain aneurysm, and the whole neighborhood helped her in any way they could. Neighbors mowed the lawn, trimmed the bushes, painted the fence, babysat the children if necessary. Kurt, being a jack of all trades, always helped her with repairs. He liked it. Another reason why our area became popular is that people here took care of each other. Kurt grabbed his plumbing tools and went to Pauline. He was gone for about an hour and a half, and when he returned, he had a smile on his face and looked quite relaxed. I wondered what exactly her plumbing problem was. "What were you doing there?" I asked. "Nothing my snake couldn't fix," he replied. "His snake? What exactly did he mean?" "Well, you seem pleased with yourself," I said. "You know I like helping Pauline. It makes me feel needed and valued." I suspected it was more than just plumbing work. How much more just sex will he have in the near future? To be honest, I was upset. "Kurt, you know how much I'm sorry. I would give anything to turn back time and fix everything, but it's impossible. It didn't mean anything. It was just a fling," I said, hoping that he would hear my repentance. "Just an affair?" he cried. "You talk about this so frivolously. You betrayed me." These words cut me to the core. It was treason. Call a spade a spade. You have committed adultery with another man. God, he was right. I tried so hard to downplay what I had done, calling it an affair, as if it wasn't that serious. But it was treason, adultery. I broke our marriage vows, but worse, I betrayed the love and trust that Kurt had in me. I was depressed that whole week about our situation. We, as Kurt said, were now simply cohabiting. When New Year's Eve arrived, we decided, as always, to go to the celebration that our neighbors were throwing. Two neighboring houses merged their lawns, creating a large space for people to socialize, have fun, and, of course, watch the Times Square ball drop on the huge screens installed for the occasion. In the middle of the evening, I heard one of the men ask Kurt about his in an open relationship status on Facebook. Kurt responded that his wife said, "It's just sex," so he thought why not take advantage of it and announce it to the world. After that, I noticed that some married women began to look at me with wariness. Single women surrounded Kurt with increased attention, and several men even tried to flirt with me. I wanted to leave, but when I suggested this to Kurt, he replied, "We can't leave until midnight, until the balloon goes down." When New Year's Day arrived, I turned around looking for Kurt to kiss him, but he was already kissing Pauline, and there were 3 other women standing next to him, waiting their turn. I approached him and said, "I'm going home. Enjoy your harem." I threw an angry look at him and the other women and, seething with rage, walked down the sidewalk towards our house. When I returned home, I was beside myself with anger. How could he flaunt this in front of our friends and neighbors? I couldn't believe it, and I walked around the house in circles, waiting for him to return. He came home at almost 2 a.m. "How could you behave like that in front of our neighbors?" I asked with the most offended tone. "Why, honey, it's just sex. What's the big deal if we're talking about it? There's no reason to be silent, right? If it doesn't matter to you, why should we hide it?" I'm a little puzzled by your reaction. Weren't you the one who said it doesn't mean anything? I looked at him and saw a sarcastic, hurt expression on his face. It didn't suit him at all. I understood that he specifically showed me this so that I would feel the pain that he once experienced. We both went to our respective bedrooms and rang in the new year without speaking to each other for the entire next day. I felt like I was losing the opportunity to talk to him, show him that I still love him, and regain his trust. Will this year be our last? I prayed that this wouldn't happen. January turned out to be a cold month, both outside and inside the house. We barely spoke until the thaw began at the end of the month. I tried to show my love through cooking his favorite dishes, complimenting his projects, and saying thank you for everything he does. I began to feel the financial burden: car payments, insurance, phone, TV. Now I appreciate everything that Kurt paid for more. I wondered what I used to spend all my money on. The only thing I had to give up was going to the salon to get my hair and manicure done. Now my natural hair color was out of the box, and I painted my nails myself. Throughout January, Kurt spent a lot of time outside the house, especially on weekends. I didn't know if he was avoiding me or just making time for his girlfriends. I nearly died of embarrassment when I received the first of many thanks on my Facebook page from women I barely knew. That's all they wrote, just "thank you." I guessed they were thanking me for letting Kurt hang out with them while being a complete idiot. It pained me terribly to think that Kurt had changed his principles so easily. Towards the end of January, when the thaw set in, Kurt began to show a friendlier attitude towards me. He even complimented the dishes I prepared. I almost jumped for joy when he said that. He noticed, I thought. Perhaps the ice was beginning to melt. February has been a roller coaster of emotions for me. At work, John was hostile to me every time we crossed paths. His divorce was in full swing, and by all accounts, he was left with only visitation rights every other weekend, while his wife and children remained in the house, for which he continued to pay. She didn't even consider the possibility of reconciliation. At the same time, I faced ridicule, angry looks, and even obscene proposals every day. At home, Kurt began to communicate with me more, asking questions about chores, local events, and even the news. Since the December fight, we have never discussed the elephant in the room, but at least we started talking. One day, he even touched my hand. It may not sound like a big deal, but he did it in a playful manner while we prepared dinner. I prepared the main course, and he cut vegetables for the salad. He had just cut up a green pepper, and I stole a piece. He lightly slapped my hand and smiled slightly. My heart trembled. Then, after finishing his preparations, he lightly nudged me with his hip in a playful manner. I couldn't help but laugh. I missed his touch, his warmth, the way he loved me. The dinner turned out to be pleasant. We had a light conversation and exchanged glances. I thought, maybe we have a chance. The next week, I was in seventh heaven. On Sunday, February 10th, my heart sank lower than it did on New Year's Eve. Kurt and I were having dinner, and I mentioned that Thursday was Valentine's Day. His face became blank, and then he said, "Yes, it is." How about we go to a nice restaurant and just enjoy each other's company? I asked hopefully. I already have other plans, he replied. I looked at him, speechless. When the silence became unbearable, he added, I promised Pauline I'd take her. She hasn't been on a Valentine's Day date in 3 years. Oh, I said, and we didn't say a word for the rest of dinner. After dinner, I sat in front of the TV, staring at the screen, but completely unaware of what was happening, immersed in my own grief. Kurt must have felt guilty, or perhaps felt sorry for me because he said, we can go out on Friday night. No, it won't be the same, I answered sadly. For the first time in 12 years, we didn't spend Valentine's Day together. Even when we were renovating the house, we set aside this day for each other. Over the course of the week, Kurt was more attentive to my moods and needs, but I didn't want him to care about me just out of pity. I wanted him to do this because he still cares about me. Kurt said I would regret what I did, and I really regretted it for several months. I wondered if I could ever earn his forgiveness and return the love he once felt for me. At this stage, I doubted that this was possible. Over the next week, Kurt was surprisingly kind to me, even touching me in a playful manner like we had done before. I tried not to flatter myself, but enjoyed his attention. It reminded me of our first days together. On Friday, Kurt came in with the mail and said, Look, we've been invited to a party next Friday. Would you like to come with me? My heart began to beat faster again. Kurt asked me on a date. I looked at him, and he was holding a card with an invitation to a party in honor of a leap year. One of our friends threw a big party to brighten up the gray winter months, since February 29th fell on a Friday. Oh, Mr. Coleman, I'll be happy to go with you, because I have nowhere to go on weekends, I replied with slight irony. I really haven't done anything special since that fateful night when I said those stupid words. Kurt, on the other hand, spent many evenings and weekends away from home, sometimes returning only at 2 in the morning. I never said anything to him about this. I didn't want to start a new argument, and I felt guilty because before, Kurt would never have done anything that could undermine my trust in him. I just stayed home, found simple things to do, and fell asleep crying, grieving over my lost love. We had a great time at the party, and Kurt really treated me like his date. He was there all the time, talking, laughing, and dancing with me. I was on cloud 9, as close to happiness as I had been in the last 3.5 months. March brought with it even more of his attention. One day, he sat next to me on the sofa while I was watching TV. I finally decided to connect to Dish Network. They had a promotion, free installation and the first month free. It was boring without TV in December, and I needed something to distract me from my worries. For the first time, Kurt just sat next to me. We didn't talk, but we laughed together at the jokes in the series. I was so excited that I was afraid to move so as not to scare him away. From that moment on, he began to sit next to me more often. When he first took my hand and intertwined our fingers, a few tears rolled down my cheeks. I'm sure he noticed, but didn't say anything. In the third week, he even put his arm around my shoulders while sitting next to me. I turned and looked at his face. He looked happy. I leaned over and kissed his cheek. He turned around and smiled. Unable to restrain myself, I kissed him on the lips. I broke our kiss and whispered, I want you to love me. Kurt pulled away and, with an impassive face, got up from the couch and headed towards the bedrooms. I took the remote control, turned off the TV, turned off the lights, and followed him. As I approached the bedrooms, I heard the lock on his door click. I tried to turn the knob, but the door was locked. I stood there, stunned. What just happened? I thought. He wanted it too, I felt it. My thoughts were filled with emotions. What did I do wrong? All I said is that I want him. But now he locked the door and left me behind it. Kurt, I called through the door. Is everything okay? Did I do something wrong? Forgive me if so. Can you open the door and talk to me, please? No, was his short answer, and then he added, I'm going to bed alone. From the tone of his voice, I realized that it was impossible to change his decision. Afterwards, I lay there, thinking about what had happened. He seemed to be in the same mood as me. What should I do now to get back to what we once had? Is this even possible? That night, I hardly slept and got up in the morning completely exhausted. It was 7 a.m., and Kurt had already left. It was normal he started work early. I wrote to him on my new phone. The number remained the same, apologizing if I had offended him in any way. Then I sent another message with a text, "I love you." He replied, "Me too." It was our little joke. The first time he said, "I love you," was at the very beginning of our relationship, and then I answered, "Me too," without thinking that I was literally saying that I loved myself. The fact that he responded the same way made me smile and feel a little touched. I thought, is it possible to love a person and not want to be with him completely? The answer was obvious. Of course you can. This is exactly what Kurt has been doing for the past 4 months. I was consoled at least by the fact that he still loved me. How long can we continue to live like this without making love? Will we be able to experience intimacy with each other again? Is this marriage destined to remain without sexual intimacy, at least for me? I made a promise to myself, and to God too, that if he came back to me, I would never make that mistake again. I won't even be alone with another man outside of work. I have learned my lesson, and as long as we are married, I will be faithful to him, even if he is not faithful to me. I only pray that one day we can return to what we had, or at least get close to it, although the memories of this betrayal will always remain. When Kurt returned home from work, it was as if we were back in the same place we were months ago, after that terrible night. He acted as if he were a wild, fearful kitten that had accidentally wandered into our yard. It was necessary to approach him slowly, carefully, without sudden movements or loud sounds. In other words, I had to sit alone on the couch, not saying a word about what happened the night before, and not reminding him in any way about our closeness. It took another 3 weeks to get back to him sitting next to me on the couch and holding my hand again. I took a deep breath, feeling a sense of peace, and laid my head on his shoulder, snuggling comfortably against his chest. We were watching a romantic comedy, and I was just enjoying the fact that we were back together at this point. He kissed the top of my head, and I whispered, "I love you." He quietly replied, "Me too." I just smiled. A few minutes later, he said, "I love you." I answered him the same, "Me too." He hugged me tighter, and I pressed myself even closer to him. I didn't say anything throughout the entire movie, trying not to ruin the moment. I just enjoyed this feeling of closeness that we had. Over the next 2 weeks, this became the norm. And then, on Thursday night, Kurt asked me if I wanted to go out to dinner with him and watch a movie the next night. I jokingly asked, "How about a date?" He replied, "It's time to finally take my beloved girl for a walk." I didn't know how to take it, and he seemed to notice my confusion. "Sorry," he said. "I didn't mean for it to sound like that. Deborah, you are my only girl and always have been." What did he mean, I thought. He wants to say that all those evenings when he was not at home, he did not spend with other women. What about all the thank yous I received from strangers? I couldn't believe it. Perhaps he meant that he had no feelings for them. I answered, a little hesitantly, "Yes," and he assured me that I would not regret it. Over the past months, I have accumulated many regrets. I hoped that this time he would be right. Our Friday night date turned out to be exactly what any woman could dream of. Well, almost. We had dinner at a nice restaurant, watched a romantic movie, and then went to a bar to dance. He paid attention only to me, and I only to him. When we returned home, I made up my mind and said, "I would really like you to spend this night with me." He paused, looked at me, and said, "I'd love to lie next to you, Deb, but understand that we'll just be sleeping." What could I say? I wanted my husband to be in my bed, and at the same time, I wanted him to love me so that we could be physically intimate. But I was ready to accept what he was ready to offer me. Perhaps someday in the future, our physical presence with each other will lead us to greater intimacy. The night passed restlessly, at least for me. I kept thinking about how my beloved man was lying next to me. The next day was a wonderful day. We worked together in the garden and showed each other our love by touching, hugging and exchanging glances. I was on top of the world and made a stupid mistake. When we finished and were heading to the bedroom to freshen up, I suggested he take a shower together. He grinned, and then I said something stupid. It's been so long since we made love in the shower. Immediately his face became expressionless again. Then he said, I'll take a shower in the other bathroom. Crap, I thought to myself. Why did I say this? Ruined the mood again. It took 2 weeks before he started sleeping in our shared bed again. I began to feel irritated and resigned to the idea that our marriage would remain without sexual intimacy. More than 6 months have passed since that terrible day. It's been over 6 months since he made love to me. In the last 3 months, I have offered myself to him and begged him more than half a dozen times, but each time he rejected me and became sad. If I have to live the rest of my life with him without sex, I will do it. I won't be happy about it, but I can bear it. My only hope is that someday he will want me again. The weight is killing me, but this is the punishment I am ready to bear. I know that he loves me. He expresses it through touches, holding my hand, looking into my face, playfully brushing me with his thigh, or patting me on the butt. He even tells me this many times. I just wish we could do what spouses do again. Now he is working in our garden, shirtless and covered in sweat. I can't take my eyes off him. He's so handsome. He straightened up and looked at me, noticing how I was looking at him. He wiped the sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand and smiled. Oh, that smile that seems to ask, "Do you like what you see?" "Oh, Kurt," I whispered, "I need you to be with me." His smile turned into a frank, lustful grin. He reached out and took my hand. I followed him silently as he led me into the house. But he didn't take me to the bedroom, but straight to the living room. He led me straight into the living room, hugged me tightly, and kissed me. Then we had sex. But in his eyes, I saw something that tore my heart into pieces. There was no love in his gaze, only indifference. For him, it was just sex, nothing more. Tears of joy gave way to tears of pain. 8 years have passed since the day that changed my life forever. Believe it or not, Kurt and I are still together. I've read articles and stories about couples becoming stronger because of or despite cheating, but I find it hard to believe. Cheating changes a relationship forever. Oh, Kurt and I still love each other. We show it in small ways every day. We say words of love to each other every day, and he even buys me flowers or jewelry just to show his love. We still have an active sex life, and at the same time, remain faithful to each other. I do everything for him. He also tries to give me maximum pleasure. However, every time we make love, my heart hurts a little. It hurts because for him, it's just physical intimacy without the love that once was. And I bitterly regret that day. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. This was the 6th time I had said this prayer out loud with the group. This time I came to the 9th meeting. In the first week, I did not know this prayer, and for the next 2 weeks, it seemed foreign to me. Perhaps it was because I didn't want to change what I knew I could and probably should change. However, by the 4th week, I was able to say it with confidence, feeling its true meaning. Today, I was nervous because this was the night when I would stand up and tell my story. Everyone in the group supported me and showed patience while I sat in the back row, silent and closed. Many of them probably did the same thing when they first came here. The group was called Cheaters Anonymous, a support group for those who have been victims of betrayal and those who have committed it themselves. There was no condemnation here, only support on the long path of overcoming pain from betrayal, or from the fact that you yourself betrayed a loved one. The key here was love. If there was no love neither before, nor during, nor even after the betrayal, then people probably would not come here. They wouldn't feel the loss and heartache that cheating brings to a relationship. Of course, one might feel embarrassed or even hurt, but these feelings would quickly pale in comparison to the suffering that cheating causes in a loving relationship. Today's moderator, Henry, stood up to begin the meeting. He liked to lighten the mood with a joke. Today, I have a story about a first grade school teacher and her students. Be warned, despite the children's theme, this story may be a little shocking. He prepared a joke like a true master of humor. The teacher, whose name I will keep secret for the sake of her innocence, was going through the alphabet with her class and decided to give each student a chance to help. Class, today we will be going through the alphabet, and I would like each of you to help me. I will say the letter, and if anyone knows a word that starts with that letter, raise your hand, and I'll choose someone to say the word. There was one boy in the class, Jimmy, from a disadvantaged area and with a difficult family situation. The teacher realized from the first days that he had a very colorful vocabulary. So she started with the letter A, and he immediately raised his hand along with several other students. The teacher thought, I can't choose Jimmy. I know what word he'll say. So she chose another student, and he said, A is apple. Next came the letter B. Jimmy immediately raised his hand again, and even waved it a little, trying to attract her attention. Of course, she knew which word he would choose, so she settled on another student. B is boy, he answered. When she said the letter C, Jimmy raised his hand again and waved it more actively, even almost jumping up from his seat to be noticed. The teacher understood that she could not choose Jimmy with this letter. There were too many inappropriate words beginning with this letter. Another student suggested the word C is cat. When she said the letter D, Jimmy raised his hand again, and this time he literally jumped out from behind his desk to get her attention. And again, the teacher knew better than to call Jimmy on this letter. D is dog, said another student. When it came to the letter E, Jimmy immediately raised his hand again and was already jumping on the spot. Only a few other students raised their hands, and the teacher quickly ran through all the possible bad words in her head, but couldn't think of any that started with the letter E. It will probably be safe with this letter, she thought. Okay, Jimmy, what's your E word? Jimmy smiled and said confidently, E is elf. The teacher breathed a sigh of relief. Jimmy then said, one of those little bastards. Henry, in turn, said, I told this anecdote today to lighten the mood, but also to emphasize that we all have expectations, and sometimes, even if we plan and prepare, people can surprise us. Sometimes these are unpleasant surprises, as in this case, and sometimes they are good. Keep trying to bring out the best in those around you, and you might be surprised, and in a good way. I would like to say the Serenity Prayer again. I think today it will take on special meaning. We said it in unison. The prayer was familiar to me. I grew up in a loving Christian home. We faithfully went to church and prayed before meals and before bed. So it wasn't something foreign or uncomfortable for me. Henry welcomed everyone, both regulars and new members. He knew how to create an atmosphere in which everyone felt comfortable and also knew how to manage meetings so that they did not turn into hate meetings. When he asked who would like to share their story, he looked straight at me. He must have noticed my excitement and realized that I was ready to make tonight special. I nodded at him, he smiled, and said, Kurt, we'd love to hear your story. Here you are among friends. I stood up and addressed the group. Hi, my name is Kurt. They all responded in unison. Hi, Kurt. Phew, I exhaled, trying to collect my thoughts. Looking at you all today, I see only one person here who shares one special trait with me. I'm wearing a wedding ring. Another person here wears hers as a reminder of what she lost. I admire her courage to come here and join us because most of us have suffered from infidelity. Carol, I stand with you and hope you find forgiveness here and continue to feel accepted. I wear my ring because I'm still married. I said still because, yes, I chose to stay even though I wanted to get a divorce first. I admit my reasons were selfish at the time. This was at the end of 2007. The economic anxieties that were just beginning to be felt in the rest of the country had already hit our region in the first waves of the Great Recession. There was uncertainty everywhere, people were losing their jobs, businesses were closing, and even the air seemed to be filled with fear about the future. My wife and I had been married for about 10 years, and during that time, we went through a lot, but it only strengthened our bond. She was a woman I loved with all my heart and, frankly, still love despite all the trials that befell us. The house we bought was located in an area that not everyone would choose to live in. Far from prestigious, it was on the verge of change, surrounded by aging buildings, with wild weeds pushing through the cracked asphalt on deserted streets. But for me, there was something about this area, and especially this house, that grabbed me. Old brick walls, a rotten veranda, creaky floors, it seemed as if the house was speaking to me, promising that in the future it would become a place where we would feel comfortable and safe. I saw potential in this house that others couldn't see. I felt it would be worth the investment. This will be a great investment. You won't regret it, I told myself, looking at the dilapidated windows and dreaming of how one day we would breathe new life into this place. When my wife cheated on me, I had already invested 9 years of blood, sweat, and tears into this house. It cost 3 times what I paid for it, and it became an area that young professionals were eager to move to. Part of this was due to the community atmosphere there, people looking out for each other. Cheating came into our marriage after what I thought was 10 good years of a strong relationship. It was the fall season, and I noticed a slight change in Deborah's behavior. That in itself didn't automatically make me think about cheating. But everything changed when I opened the laundry basket and caught the smell of men's cologne. They say that smell is the most sensitive sense, and I believe it. I work as a maintenance manager at a factory and don't wear cologne, so why does my laundry basket smell like it? I started searching until I found one of Deborah's outfits that smelled like this cologne. Now I had a strong suspicion, but no proof. At my job, I usually start before her, but also finish later, so she gets home before me. I needed to find out what was going on. It took 2 weeks before I could agree to leave work at 3:30 every day. This way I could keep an eye on her when she left work at 4 o'clock. It only took 3 days to obtain the necessary evidence. She left work at the same time as a colleague. They talked for a minute, and then she followed him in the car to a nearby motel. I saw them go inside. I was both angry and sad at the same time. I'm not a fool. I understood what they were doing there. I needed proof, but I didn't want to knock on the door. Obviously, this wasn't the first time, so I wouldn't stop something that had already started. I sat in the car for about an hour. When they came out, I took a few pictures with my phone. One of them, where they kissed in the doorway, pierced me right through. A disheveled bed was visible in the background. I got home late that night and went straight to the computer. I emailed the photos to myself and printed 3 copies. I cropped one of them to get a good picture of the man's face. I needed this to find out who he was. The next day was Thursday, and I left work a little early, went to her office, dressed in my best suit, which for most people is just business casual. I started talking to the secretary, flirted a little, and asked if she knew who the man in the photo was. She said, "Yes, this is John Putnam. Why are you asking?" I met him at a football match. I remember faces better than names. I just didn't want to seem stupid if I saw him again and had to say something like, "Hey, buddy," or something equally ridiculous. "Oh, I see. I'm not good at remembering names either," she replied. We chatted a bit, and I left. It didn't take me long to do a little research online and find out his address. I drove past his house and saw where he lived. There was a children's swing in the backyard and children were playing on it. I didn't want to bother his wife while she had the kids at home, so I decided to come back on Friday. I went to the bar and sipped a couple of beers. When I got home, a little later than usual, I ate a warm dinner and told Deborah that I wasn't feeling well and would be going to bed early. She seemed worried, and I had a hard time not moving away when she put her hand to my forehead, checking my temperature. On Friday, I took half a day off. I drove back to John's house and noticed a car in the driveway. I went to the door and knocked. A pleasant-looking woman of about 35 opened the door and asked, "How can I help?" My name is Kurt Coleman, and it's hard for me to say this, but your husband works with my wife, and they are cheating on us." She looked at me. I think she saw the pain in my eyes, so she asked, "How do you know that?" "Yesterday, I followed them and saw them go to a motel after work." Are you sure this is my husband? I took out the printed photograph and showed it to her. She just stared at her. I pulled out another photo and said, "They were there for about an hour before I took that picture of them kissing." "Hour?" she said. We must give her credit. She was able to joke even at such a moment. We talked for a while, and I told her that I was going to talk to my wife that evening. "Are you going to divorce her?" she asked. "Right now, I see no reason not to do it." Little did I know that just 4 days later, I would have enough reasons to change my mind. "Well, don't mention you talked to me. I'm going to meet with a lawyer next week. I need to think through all my options and understand how this will affect my family," she said. I didn't know what she was going to do. She had 2 small children to think about. Like most people, I don't like conflict, so I avoided going home until almost 8 in the evening. I was often late at work, but not that much. I sat down at the dining table. Deborah looked at me and said, "You're late. How do you feel?" "It's like someone shit on my plate," I replied. She turned to me with a surprised expression on her face. I didn't wait for her to say, "You don't love me anymore." Her face changed from surprise to shocked. "Of course I do," she said. "Then why are you cheating on me?" I saw horror and realization slowly appear on her face. Her eyes widened. "What are you talking about?" She tried to stall for time to understand what exactly I knew. "Have I offended you in some way?" I asked. "No, honey. You are the best husband anyone could ask for," she replied, trying to avoid the topic. "Then why?" I asked again. The realization that she was caught showed up on her face, and I took out the photo of them kissing and placed it on the table. "Oh my God," she said, covering her face with her hand. She immediately started crying. Again I asked, "Why?" "Sorry, it didn't mean anything. It was just a fling," she replied. Just a fling, I thought. How can this be just a fling? With that, I stood up, looked at her, and said, "Deborah, you will regret saying that." Then I ran out of the house and slammed the door. I turned off my phone, completely cutting myself off from the outside world, and spent the entire weekend alone, not making myself known. I didn't want to hear an explanation, or see her, or talk to anyone. As if hiding in my own shell, I mulled over what had happened, trying to calm the waves of anger and disappointment that haunted me. Everything that I knew and considered unshakable collapsed, leaving behind an emptiness. On Monday, instead of going to work, I headed to the lawyer's office. It was an impulsive decision, but I felt like I needed to at least know what my options were. I sat in the lawyer's office, tense and silent, while he, sorting through documents and papers, calmly outlined to me all the legal aspects of a possible divorce. With every word he said, the situation became overgrown with details that became less and less attractive. "If you decide to get a divorce," the lawyer said, looking at me over his glasses, "you will have to give half your pension funds, half your savings, and probably pay alimony to Deborah. Also, most likely, the house will have to be sold so that you can divide the proceeds equally." These words were like an icy shower. The house that I furnished with my own hands, which became my refuge, and, it seemed, a part of my soul, and now they tell me that I might lose it. I sat pressed against the back of my chair, feeling the protest growing inside me. Everything we created, everything I created for us, was now subject to division, as if our lives were reduced to simple calculations and numbers. "Come on," I burst out, and I stood up abruptly. The thought that I would have to part with this house and share everything that I had saved for years was unbearable for me. "Sorry, guys, I didn't want to express myself, but that's exactly what I said then. She's the one who cheated on me, so why should I pay?" That night, I finally returned home after disappearing for the entire weekend without leaving a message or call. The house greeted me with silence, that tense, suffocating silence that immediately swallows you up after a quarrel. As soon as I opened the door and entered the hallway, I immediately noticed Deborah sitting on the edge of the living room sofa. At my appearance, she perked up, raising her eyes, in which a mixture of despair and hope froze. Her face was haggard and pale, and her slightly reddish, swollen eyelids showed that she had hardly slept, probably waiting for my return and desperately worrying about us. When she noticed me, she got up from the sofa and, without hesitation, went to me with an impulse to hug me, as if, feeling my warmth, she could find at least a little consolation. My heart sank painfully with the desire to respond, to hug her, to allow myself to forget about what happened at least for a moment and drown in her arms, as it was before. But I understood that if I allowed myself to soften even a little, I would not be able to say what I came back for. I raised my hand, barely touching her shoulder, stopping her. She froze, clearly not expecting this from me, and something painfully wounding flashed in her eyes, which immediately made it clear how deeply I had hurt her. In this touch, in this brief stopped movement, our inexpressible pain, the whole severity of what happened, lay hidden. "Deborah," I began, trying to keep my voice calm, but feeling it shaking. "I need to tell you something." She nodded, seeming to be panting, looking at me expectantly, and I took a deep breath to pull myself together. "I went to see a lawyer to discuss divorce," I said, feeling the words cut through us like a cold blade. She stood in front of me, silently, with an expression of pain and horror on her face, and at that moment it seemed to me that the walls of this house, once cozy and warm, seemed to have narrowed, turning us into prisoners of our common drama, from which, it seems, there was salvation. She lowered her eyes and begged, "No, not a divorce." She seemed to breathe a sigh of relief when I quietly added that there would be no divorce after all. Her shoulders seemed to sag slightly, as if the weight weighing on them had become lighter. But even her relief did not bring me peace. Sometimes I wondered, wouldn't it be better for both of us if this finale did take place? Perhaps, if we had separated, each of us would have had a chance to start over from scratch, without the heavy burden of resentment and betrayal that was now weighing on us. It sounded stupid and illogical, but when the lawyer explained to me all the consequences of divorce, all the legal nuances, losses, and division of property, I felt strangely relieved. It seemed to give me the justification I needed. I didn't want to get a divorce. I didn't want this war to destroy us, to divide our common home and lives into parts that would be impossible to put back together. And despite all the pain, I still loved her. I loved so much that this love seemed to turn over inside me, burning me with anger and, on the verge of absurdity, hatred. Hatred and love intertwined into one painful ball, not allowing me to find peace. As I spoke about this, standing in front of the group, telling my story, my voice shook. Memories came flooding back, pushing out emotions that I had hidden for so long. Tears suddenly welled up in my eyes, and I felt control of myself slipping away. I tried to stop, to pull myself together, but it seemed that too much inside had finally burst out. I burst into tears standing in front of the group, and at that moment all the tension, everything that had been building up for so long, seemed to find a way out, leaving me exhausted and broken. They waited patiently. When I raised my head, I saw only support on their faces. They've all been through this in one form or another. When she said it didn't mean anything, it was just a fling, something died in me. She took something that was personal, sacred, and special, and turned it into something as ordinary as animals do when they are driven by instinct. I told her that from now on we will live under the same roof, but in different worlds. I occupied the guest room, carefully avoiding her bedroom, and it seemed that this invisible border became a symbol of the crack that lay between us. I announced that I would continue to pay the mortgage and basic utilities, leaving her to buy groceries and pay small bills. In words, it looked like a simple solution, but in reality, everything turned out to be much more complicated. After just a month, she began to feel that her usual lifestyle had become an unaffordable luxury for her. Car, insurance, clothes, random purchases, all this, which she used to spend money on without thinking, now became a noticeable expense item that began to hit her salary. Until that moment, I had never considered myself a vindictive person. I was the one who preferred to resolve the issue peacefully and not look for an opportunity to strike back. But her betrayal awakened in me something I never knew existed: a desire to take revenge, to show her that her action had consequences. My first act of revenge was quiet and almost unnoticeable, but that made it even sweeter. One Thursday, she cautiously asked if we could go out for dinner like we used to. Apparently, she naively hoped that a joint dinner would bring us at least one step closer to each other. Of course, I replied, keeping my tone calm, and I'll even pay. I saw a shadow of gratitude on her face, relief, as if she was looking for the slightest sign of reconciliation. At that moment, I felt a strange pleasure, knowing that tomorrow her lover would be served with divorce papers from his own wife. Paradoxically, inside I felt something like a small triumph, knowing that now that their secret was revealed, his life was falling apart at the seams in the same way that mine had once been shattered to pieces. The next day, when she came home, she was furious. This only made me angrier. My second vindictive act was to change my Facebook status to "in an open relationship." When she learned about this from her sister, she was angry again. I admit, it gave me some pleasure. My third act of revenge was to make her believe that I, too, was enjoying life, as she put it, just for the sake of having affairs. One of the neighbors, a young widow, needed help with her plumbing, and I was always happy to help her with something around the house. When I returned home with a satisfied smile on my face, Deborah became suspicious. She asked me why I was so happy, and I replied that my snake helped fix her plumbing problems. Needless to say, we had big problems. I'm sure she was thinking about getting a divorce, but with the economic downturn, she couldn't afford to quit her job and move, and she couldn't afford her own place. There were other vindictive acts, one of which involved my friends leaving thank you messages to her via Facebook. I wanted her to feel like I was enjoying this, just for a fling lifestyle. In fact, my wedding vows kept me from actually doing anything about it. I still held on to my promises. The most vindictive act, perhaps, was the one that was not planned in advance. The young widow I was talking about lost her husband a couple of years ago, and at a New Year's party she mentioned that she hadn't had a real Valentine's Day since he died. I then told her that I would take her out to dinner and dancing this year. I think it hurt my wife the most. We always made Valentine's Day a special evening for us. No matter what happened around us, this night was ours. However, this made me realize that I was continuing to punish her and that I needed to make a decision, change my attitude towards her, or get a divorce. Well, as you know, the divorce did not happen. So I started making an effort to show her that I still cared. But there was one obstacle that, to my shame, I never overcame. It's been 8 years since that night, and I still can't be truly intimate with her. Yes, 8 years. You're probably asking yourself, why? To explain, I need to tell you a little about my background. I've only had 4 women in my life. The first one was my love. We were in love, and the summer was wonderful. But then she went back to college, and I got an internship in machine maintenance. Our summer of love came to an end, and shortly after the school year began, she realized that she no longer loved me. Our relationship ended, and so did our time together. I had 2 more serious romances, each lasting about 2 years. Ultimately, both ended mutually as each of us realized that our life goals and dreams were not the same. Then I met Deborah. There was an immediate connection between us. I think I realized within the first month that she was the one. 2 years later, we got married. I am telling you all this so that you can understand where this problem comes from and why I still cannot forgive her betrayal. In all my relationships, it was never just sex. It was always making love. So when she called it just a fling and said it didn't mean anything, I couldn't believe it. For sports fans, is the Super Bowl just a game for New England Patriots fans? Or maybe the World Series is just baseball for New York Yankees fans? Or is the Stanley Cup just a trophy for Red Wings fans? Is the SEC Championship just another game for Crimson Tide fans? What about Manchester United fans if their manager said, "It's just the World Cup"? For those who aren't into sports, imagine if your congressman said, "It's just the presidency, it doesn't matter who wins." Or if your pastor, priest, rabbi, or imam said, "It's just a religion, it doesn't matter which one you follow." I became emotional again and, with tears in my eyes, said, How can this be just a fling? I continued, my eyes wet with tears. For the past 8 years, I have not been able to make love to my wife. Oh, don't get me wrong, we have intimacy. But I realize that, apparently, sex is just an animal action. He doesn't need love. In fact, he doesn't need any emotions at all. From that moment on, intimacy with my wife became simply a physical act. Yes, enjoyable, but ultimately just a physical exercise. So I stand before you today, first to apologize for taking up most of the evening's time, and then to ask you to help me overcome this psychological barrier and begin to once again make love to my wife and not just have sex. The Serenity Prayer teaches me that I cannot change the fact that she cheated, but I can change the current situation if I can figure out how to do it and find the courage to do it. The courage to be vulnerable again. I would be grateful for any advice. Thanks for listening. I'm sitting at my desk, trying to concentrate on my work. I'm nervous. Today is the day Deborah will decide whether our life together will end sooner or later. I pray that she will want to fight for us, for our future together. However, the decision is ultimately hers. I can imagine her solution in both versions. We've been married for 19 years. I hope we celebrate our 20th anniversary. Whatever, I hope that we will celebrate 50 years together. Our marriage was not paradise. In fact, the last 9 years have been strained. Even though I told and showed her that I loved her every day, deep down I know that at the same time I made her life a living hell. I understand if she decides to just give up and let it all end. 9 years ago, when Deborah cheated on me, I thought about leaving. I even went so far as to meet with a lawyer about the divorce. I decided to stay for selfish reasons, but also because deep down I didn't want a divorce. I still loved her even though I hated her. Now, 9 years later, I am the one who hopes she chooses to stay with me. Our meeting is scheduled in half an hour. She stayed home from work, and I, deciding to give her space to make a decision, went to work. It's good that I no longer work directly with machines. It's unlikely that I could work with them today, since my head was occupied with something else. Now I sit in my office and direct others to complete tasks. This, unfortunately, gives me a lot of time to think and remember the 20-odd years that Deborah and I were together. Deborah, the meeting is scheduled in half an hour, but I haven't made a final decision yet. Whatever choice I make, our lives will change dramatically, perhaps forever. In the end, I have to decide if it's all worth it. Kurt says, don't give up. But I think maybe it would be better to give up after all. He could find someone else, someone he could love completely. I know that he loves me, but since I cheated on him, that old love in our most intimate moments is no longer there. At first, I thought that my irregular cycles were signs of the onset of age-related hormonal changes. I knew that my desire for sex had decreased. After all, I was already approaching 50. When I told my antenatal doctor about this, she asked me how long I had been experiencing pain during intimacy. I answered that about a year ago. She looked at me and said, I'll run some tests on you. The results showed that this is not just a hormonal change. She said I had been diagnosed with cancer. She sent me home with information and links to sites to explore. That night, when Kurt returned from work, he immediately knew something was wrong. I tried to pretend that everything was fine, but he insisted. When I told him, he was shocked. He immediately sat down at the computer and began searching for information, printing out pages and pages of materials on my diagnosis. Honey, we will get through this. Yes, the path will not be easy, but I know that we can win, he said, trying to encourage me for what I had to go through. The truth is, I'm not sure if I want to go through all of this. My doctor said she would refer me to an oncologist who specializes in this type of surgery. From what I read on the internet, the operation will consist of a radical ectomy. In other words, all of my reproductive organs will be removed. Even then, I may have to undergo radiation therapy and possibly chemotherapy. It will be a few months before I return to normal life, and that's the best-case scenario, if everything goes perfectly. But how can you consider yourself normal if all the organs that make you a woman are removed? I don't know if I want to be that normal. What will happen to Kurt? How will he react to this new me? If he can't make love to me now, how can he do it with a restored woman? Will I be able to feel like a woman? On the outside, nothing will change for everyone else, but on the inside, I will feel completely different. When I'm about to make a final decision, I tend to just let the disease take its course. As long as I have the means to relieve the pain, I'm willing to endure it. Kurt, I'm sitting in the doctor's waiting room waiting for my wife to come. I see her as soon as she walks in. I can tell from the look on her face that she has made a decision. God, I hope she decided to fight. She sits down next to me. I turn to her and kiss her softly. I love her so much that I don't even know how to live without her if she leaves. I know I'll be lost without her. She is my soulmate. I knew this almost from the moment we met. Lord, help us get through this. Take this disease away from her. I pray mentally, turning to God. I hope he hears me. Tears begin to well up as I stare at the floor in front of me. I have to stop crying, I tell myself. I need to be strong for her. She will need my support. Mr. and Mrs. Coleman, asks the nurse. We raise our heads and nod. The doctor is ready to see you. As we enter the office, I take Deborah's hand and squeeze it lightly. She responds in kind. We are together, facing our future at this important moment. The doctor greets us, and I begin to think how many conversations like this he's had to have before. We sit down and he asks, "Do you have any questions I can answer?" Deborah answers for both of us. I think I have all the answers I need. We found so much information on the sites that we already know almost everything we need. The doctor begins to explain what the surgery will involve and what to expect during the recovery process. Deborah interrupts him. What will happen if I don't do anything? He looks stunned. He works in a profession where he fights the disease every day. It doesn't even occur to him that someone might not want to be treated. He hesitates before answering, well, the pain will gradually get worse, and the cancer will spread to the lymph nodes and throughout the body. If you do nothing but control the pain, you probably won't last a year. Obviously, he said this to shock her into making a decision to fight the disease. I look at Kurt. He has tears in his eyes. I don't think he expected me to bring it up. Of course, he probably assumed it was possible, but he didn't want to face it. I saw in his eyes a desperate desire for me to say, I'm ready to do anything to stay with you. But after everything I learned, I started to feel like maybe now was the time to let him go. People say it's selfish not to want to fight for your life. You have to fight for your loved ones. You can't think only about yourself. How will this affect them? But I think about my husband. He's still young enough to find someone else. Find someone he can love completely, with whom he can truly make love and not just have sex. 9 years have passed, and he still hasn't forgiven me. I know I hurt him badly. I thought we could get through this. I showed him every day that I love only him. He also showed me his love, but still could not make love to me. To some extent, I really was selfish. When I cheated on him, I should have walked away, left the house to him, and only asked for some money to cover rent, and for a while until I found a job and could support myself. But I wanted to stay married, to be with him every day. I wanted to feel the love that he was still willing to show me. I didn't want to lose this. But now that this diagnosis has come, I feel like God is telling me it's time to let it go. Kurt interrupts my thoughts by addressing the doctor. Can we have some time to talk in private? Of course, my next appointment is in 20 minutes, so you have time to discuss everything calmly, the doctor replies. Kurt turns to me. I see tears and despair in his eyes, his plea for me to change my mind. Deb, we can handle this. The success rate of this operation is high. I will be with you every step of the way. Kurt, you read the same thing I did. Possible side effects and complications. It will take months to recover. And when I recover, I will feel completely different, and it will probably be strange for you to feel it too. I will have no reproductive organs left, and I will no longer feel like a woman. How would you feel if your genitals were removed? Would you feel like a man? I don't know if I can live the rest of my life knowing that you perceive me as a woman without sexuality. Deb, I love you, Kurt said. I will love you no matter what happens. Yes, we will have to go through some changes, and if you don't get your sexual desire back, it won't matter, because it's just sex. I flinched at his words. He noticed this and understood what he said. He realized that his inability to make love to me again was also an important factor in my decision. I don't want to lose you, honey. I can't imagine how I can live without you, he continued. You can live, Kurt. You will find someone else and love her. You will live life to the fullest and love someone with all your heart. I saw the pain on his face when I said this. I didn't want to hurt him anymore. I've already hurt him enough. I just wanted to let him know that he could find someone else to take my place. Deborah, I don't want anyone but you, Kurt said. From the first moment I saw you, I knew you were the one. I know I wasn't what you wanted me to be. I know I wasn't the husband I should have been. I tried to change, talked to others, and asked for their advice. If you say you're ready to fight, I'll change. I swear I will. You showed me love all these 9 years, and I responded with contempt. I don't want to lose you. Please tell me that you are ready to fight, and you will see that I will change. I love you so much. I will love you completely and forever. I started crying. Seeing the pain in his eyes and the love that was also there, I felt pain inside. I had already made my decision and felt that it would be best for both of us. Now he tells me that he wants me to live and that he will love me completely again. How can I refuse him? I want to let him go so he can find someone else, but I also want him back, the Kurt who loved me completely and completely. If I don't try, I'll never be able to get it back. He will be tormented by my decision and will always look for a way to change everything. I want him back so bad. I want him to make love to me again. I crave this with all my being. I look up at him. We're both crying. I love you, Kurt. I've never loved anyone else. You have been the one since I met you. I'm so sorry that I hurt you. Oh, how I wish I could turn back time and take this pain away from you. I don't want to hurt you again. I took a deep breath and said, I will do this for you, for us. 3 weeks later, I found myself in the hospital for surgery. It was as bad as they expected. A few days later, I was sent home with orders to stay in bed and take painkillers. In a few weeks, they will evaluate my condition again and possibly start chemotherapy. I remember almost nothing from the first week at home. I mostly slept. But I remember that Kurt was there every time I woke up. He was like my guardian angel watching over me. During the second week of recovery, I stood in the bathroom getting ready to shower and change my bandages. When I took off the old bandages and looked at myself in the mirror, I saw a large scar on my stomach. I will never wear a two-piece swimsuit again. This scar will be a constant reminder of how my womanhood was taken from me. I burst into tears. Kurt heard me and quickly entered the bathroom. He came over, hugged me, and I cried on his shoulder. He took me back to the bedroom, and we sat on the bed. I continued to cry. He started crying too and said, I'm so sorry, God. I wish I could change everything. It's all my fault. Why was I so stubborn? I looked at him, perplexed. He said, Deborah, it's my fault you got cancer. Now I was even more puzzled. He began to explain his logic. All these 9 years I made your life hell. No, Kurt, I know you love me. I felt your love every day, I said. But not where it mattered. I couldn't or wouldn't make love to you. Every time it was just sex. Every time I finished, it was like I left a small piece of anger in you. Anger that you betrayed our relationship. This anger took root and became a cancer that grew with each new manifestation of my anger. My selfish anger did this to you. I will never forgive myself for causing you such pain. Oh, Kurt, it's all my fault, and I don't know why. You were always kind to me, always took care of me. I was a stupid, selfish fool. This is already in the past. Everything will be different now, Kurt said. When faced with death, you begin to understand what is truly important and what you can let go of. Cancer, whether it is curable or not, forces you to look at your mortality. A month ago, I was ready to die. I thought it would be better for both of us. Now I want to live. I want to restore our relationship. I want to truly live and love with my husband, the true love of my life. We spent the next hour lying in bed crying, but for different reasons. In the third week, I began to move a little, enough so that I could get to the doctor. Based on the results of the examination, it became clear that the operation was successful. No signs of cancer were found, and I was gradually, slowly, but still recovering. After 4 weeks, Kurt had to return to work. He used all of his vacation and personal time to be home with me during my recovery. I still didn't feel 100%, more like 60 to 65% of normal, the new normal. I was lying in bed, not wanting to get up, when the doorbell rang. I slowly climbed out of bed, hoping whoever called would just leave. The bell rang again. I threw on my robe and headed to the front door. Polina, my neighbor, stood on the threshold with a saucepan in her hands. When I had surgery, the neighbors organized food delivery for us, so it was not surprising to see her with a saucepan. However, as I recovered, these meals gradually stopped. "Hi, Deborah," she said. "I know Kurt is back at work today, so I decided to help out a little. All you have to do is just warm it up." "Thanks, come in. I'll put this in the refrigerator." Pauline was one of my neighbors, but I was still angry with her from that night 9 years ago when Kurt went to her house to solve her plumbing problems. However, I decided to be polite. "How do you feel?" she asked. I noticed that she was a little nervous. She clearly had something on her mind. "It's getting better every day, not 100%, but I'm slowly getting better," I answered, trying to maintain a light conversation. She hesitated, but finally said, "Deborah, can we sit down and talk?" "Of course," I said and walked into the living room. As we sat down, she began the conversation. "I feel like there's something wrong between us, and I'd like to clear things up if possible." "No, it's okay," I lied, trying to avoid the conversation. "Deborah, I've seen the way you talk to other neighbors, and it's nothing like the way you talk to me. I don't know what's wrong, but I'd like to find out so I can possibly fix it." I wasn't going to beat around the bush. I decided that I would tell her everything I thought. "You know why?" I said. "No, I don't know. This has been going on for many years. The only thing that comes to mind is a kiss on New Year's Eve. Is that really the point? It's not just about the kiss. I know Kurt slept with you earlier that month," I said, taking off all my masks. Polina started laughing, which angered me even more. "Why do you think so?" she asked. "You called about some plumbing problem, and Kurt was gone for about an hour and a half, and when he came back, he was relaxed, smiling and said, 'It was a minor problem, my kite took care of it.'" She grinned. "Deborah, there was nothing between us. I did have a clog and Kurt cleared it out. Then we just talked. He poured out his soul to me. You know, you hurt him very much. He was so angry that I thought you too would end up, but I never had anything with your husband." "Then why did he take you to dinner on Valentine's Day and not me?" I asked. "Deborah, you know I lost Ken about 2 years ago. We were talking at a New Year's party, and I told him I didn't want to be alone again in the winter, especially on Valentine's Day. He offered to go with me as a friend." "I really thought you were the first of many," I said. She laughed again. "What's so funny?" I asked. "Deborah, he hasn't been with anyone but you since you started dating. We talked a lot about this. He came home late from the bar because he was so angry that he couldn't go home. He was afraid he would do something he would regret. I was getting thank yous on my Facebook page from women I didn't know. Are you saying that this is all just a coincidence?" "No, it's not a coincidence. He asked those women to leave you these thank yous in order to make you angry and make you feel the pain that he himself felt. He told me that he wanted you to feel what it was like to have someone you love with all your heart betray your marriage vows." "Are you saying that this was all an act? I don't believe you." I was angry that he could do something like that to me. How could he? But then I remembered what I had done myself, and I felt sad. I really hurt him badly. I fell silent, immersed in deep thoughts. Suddenly, a thought occurred to me. If he didn't sleep with anyone, then I didn't destroy his moral compass. He was still the same man I married, albeit a little broken because of what I had done, but still a man with principles. Then Polina spoke. He loves you very much. That's why he asked you to fight cancer. He told me that you wanted to just let the illness take its toll, but he didn't want to lose you. I started crying. I turned our relationship into a mess, and yet he continued to love me. When I had cried enough, Polina asked, "Can I change the subject?" "Yes, please," I replied. We talked for about an hour. I really felt connected to her. She was completely honest with me, so I decided to ask her a question that had been bothering me for the last couple of years. "Polina, can I ask you a personal question?" "Of course, we open our souls today, ask anything," she said. "What happened between you and Bruce?" Bruce was her second husband. They divorced a couple of years ago. She became sad and, with regret in her voice, replied, "I think everything was doomed from the very beginning." "Why?" I asked. "When you lose someone you love with all your heart, your love for them does not disappear. He always remains in your thoughts, in your heart. Of course, there is a physical emptiness, but he still remains a part of you. So when someone else comes along, he has to share your love with that dead person. It's complicated. They want to get all your love. They, as a rule, do not want to share it. In our case, everything was even more complicated because I had two teenage sons. They had no animosity towards Bruce, but he was not Ken, he was not their father. I think the last straw was when in the second year of our marriage, he started talking about selling the house and moving out of the area. Ken and I bought this house when we first got married. We renovated it together. Together we brought our kids into this house. I couldn't leave him. Besides, I couldn't leave the area. My parents died in a car accident while I was in college. When I lost Ken, I lost my entire family. My neighbors came to my aid, supported me, and loved me. They became my family. I couldn't leave them. Well, it ended in tears, of which there were many, but the neighbors, especially your husband, supported me again and continue to do so. When I go to work at the hospital, I know I don't have to worry about my sons. They are taken care of by friends and neighbors, my family. Her words were filled with such genuine passion that they made me think about how Kurt and I bought our house. Our area was completely different back then. He had changed to what he was now, thanks in large part to Kurt. We talked a little more, after which Polina left to have time to rest before the night shift. When Kurt got home, I had already heated the casserole and set the table. We enjoyed a wonderful dinner together. After dinner, I asked Kurt, "Can we talk?" "Of course, dear." "About what?" he asked. "About the elephant in the room," I replied. He looked around playfully, then looked at me seriously again and said, "I think it's time to talk." "Kurt, first of all, I want to say how sorry I am. I know I've said this hundreds of times, but I need you to understand that if I could change everything, I would." "I know, Deb. Don't you think I see the pain when something reminds us of what we've been through?" "I know, but you know I love you, right?" I asked. "Of course, dear. Now you're bothering me." "Don't worry. I just want you to understand that I love you and always will." "Okay, so what do you want to talk about?" he asked. "About those 6 months when we almost broke up." "Okay," he replied, a little hesitantly. "I know this sounds hypocritical, but when you decided to lead a life of just sex, I was desperate and sad. You were no longer the man I married. He would never do that. Yes, I understand that it was my fault, and I deserved retribution, but it still hurt me to realize that I destroyed you, your principles." "Okay, so what next?" "Today I learned from Polina that it was all a sham. You never slept with anyone else, at least that's what she told me." "Deborah, you really hurt me. I know I wanted to hurt you back." He fell silent for a minute. I had nothing to say other than to apologize again, but he had heard that apology many times before. Then he said, "Deborah, let me tell you something you may not know about me. When we got together, we had already had sex with others, we knew it. We even said to each other, "What happened in the past remains in the past." He paused again. "I've been with 3 women before you, Deborah. With each of them, it was not just sex, it was always making love. When you are with someone, you are making love. When you called it just sex, my world fell apart. Is this all it's always been to you? Just sex? I put my heart and soul into this every time I was with you. How could you just take this as sex? Honestly, I hated the last 8 years of just sex. If this really is just supposed to be sex, then I better not do it at all," he said firmly. I felt unbearably ashamed listening to this. "Oh, Kurt, I'm so sorry. I feel so empty," I admitted. "Will I dare to reveal the whole truth about myself to him? I'm afraid to tell you this. I don't know how you'll look at me after this. I'm embarrassed to say, but during my college years and the 5 years after, I was probably with 10 times more men than you were with women. I'm not proud of it. The first time I was at a party was in my first year. I got drunk, and one of the guys took advantage of me. I felt used. That's why I tried not to attach much importance to sexual relationships until I met you. You were different. Every time we were together, you made love to me. I saw it in your eyes. It seemed that only I existed in the world. These last 8 years have been torture for me. Seeing you having sex with me, but without love in your eyes, broke my heart." I paused, wondering if I should tell him one more thing. I knew it would bring him back to painful memories, but I needed to tell the truth. I needed to open my soul to him. What happened with John was my return to those student days when I thought of it as a purely physical act without emotion. Again, I'm so sorry. Do you think you can ever love me again and trust me enough for me to see that love in your eyes again when we can be intimate together again? I fell silent again. Kurt was silent. I couldn't understand what he was thinking. The silence was unbearable, and I decided to break it, ready to talk about anything, just to distract him from my mistakes. "Kurt, I know I'm still a long way from a full recovery, but if you want, I can take care of you until I can make love to you completely." Then he said something that made me realize that I completely got my husband back. "Deb, I want our first time after surgery to be a special moment. I don't want to cheapen it with substitutes, no matter how much I like what you can do," he said with a grin and a playful wink. I was so glad that we finally talked about it. For 8 years, I was afraid to broach the subject, fearing that he would withdraw into himself again, or that maybe he would decide he'd had enough, and I'd lose him forever. On his part, he probably didn't want to bring it up because of the painful memories. Now we could move forward. It seemed like we had lost almost a decade. We spent the next 2 months loving each other emotionally every minute we were together. I can't even count how many "I love you" and "me too" texts we sent to each other when we weren't physically together. I waited impatiently for the doctor to clear us to resume intimacy, not sex, but hopefully lovemaking. When the doctor gave us the okay, Kurt surprised me by booking a room at a luxury hotel for 4 days, Thursday through Sunday. To say that I was delighted and a little nervous would be an understatement. I was worried. Will Kurt like the new me? I prayed that we could find pleasure in this, both physically and emotionally. When we got to the hotel, it felt like we were on our honeymoon. We couldn't wait to get to our room. I knew that he had already seen me naked with a scar many times since the operation, but now I felt insecure. Before I took off my top, I told Kurt, "Let me get ready and I'll meet you in the bedroom." I took my travel bag and went into the bathroom. Taking off my shirt, I looked at myself in the mirror again. I knew Kurt didn't love me for my looks, but it still hurt to look at that scar, knowing that my husband would see it for the rest of our lives. I took out special underwear, which I secretly put in my suitcase. It was a new bodysuit in a deep red color, with enough fabric to cover the scar, but still leaving enough exposed skin to tempt my husband. I hoped he would like it. I was nervous when I opened the door. Will I be able to get back what we had before I destroyed everything? Can we make love and forget about the past? I said a short prayer as I opened the bathroom door. "God, please let my husband love me completely as I love him." I didn't need to worry. When he saw me, His eyes lit up. "You look amazing," he said. My heart fluttered, and then he added, "I hope you don't expect this to stay on you for long." I smiled and replied, "That's exactly the reaction I was hoping for." "I love you," he said. "And I you," I answered, and we laughed together. We lay there enjoying the moment of happiness. It felt like we were newlyweds on our honeymoon, like we were starting over. We spent the entire weekend enjoying each other's company. We went for couples massages, had dinner at a restaurant, walked hand in hand along the lake, and of course, made love. When we returned home, we didn't go back to our old routine. We promised each other that nothing would come between us, that we would only focus on each other. Every day was like our first like newlyweds. We no longer worried about small things because almost everything was, in fact, small. We practically did not quarrel. There was simply no point in it. We had lived together for over 20 years. We knew what to expect from each other and how to make each other happy, and we did it. My only regret was that it took us so long to get to this point. Kurt. I'm standing here. Next to me is my brother. He traveled a 5-hour journey, and Polina and her sons, they came from college to be here. How will I live next? How can I cope? Deborah, the love of my life, has just left me. The cancer has returned. Metastases have spread through the lymph nodes and internal organs. By the time we found out, it was too late for treatment. We still barely made it to our 25th anniversary. The last month has been very difficult for her. It was unbearable to see her suffer, and when she decided to stop fighting, I knew it was best for her. Now I'm left alone. I just don't know how I'll live without her. How can I bear this? One of the last things she said to me was, "We have reached 25 years, 15 more than I was originally allotted. Thank you for not giving up on us. I love you so much, always have, and thank you for loving me too, especially the last 5 years. It was real grace. I love you." I burst into tears remembering her words. Polina, putting her arm around my shoulder, said, "Kurt, look around, look at all this love and support." I looked up from the grave into the cemetery. This brought back even more memories. When Deborah and I moved here, the place was overgrown and barely maintained. It was originally a church cemetery, but the church burned down and the city took over the care and maintenance of the grounds. A couple of years later, after we bought the house, Deborah and I decided that the place was looking like an eyesore, and we could do something about it. We started clearing the bushes and mowing the grass. Neighbors soon joined us, and within a few weeks the place became something we could be proud of. It became our neighborhood cemetery, which we accepted into our family. When city crews arrived to do their minimal maintenance of the area, they couldn't believe their eyes. After a few years, they just left it to us, and we were happy to take care of the place. Standing there, I looked around at the faces of the people around me, both young and old, of all different nationalities. They all came to Deborah's funeral. People from her work, my colleagues, neighbors, hundreds of people. They came to support me and each other. Music began to play from the funeral home's portable speaker system. The hymn, "It Is Well," was playing. It was fitting. Deborah, especially in the last 5 years, had been happy and at peace. Everything was fine with her soul since I stopped being selfish. Most people stood with their heads down, lost in their thoughts. I hope these were fond memories, moments of joy that we shared. Polina, standing next to me and holding my hand, squeezed my fingers tighter. She leaned towards me and said, "They are here for you, to support you in your grief. I know because I myself stood only 20 feet from this place 17 years ago, not knowing how I could continue to live." I squeezed her hand back, and she returned the favor. "There is an emptiness in your life and in your heart right now. Let us fill it, and when you're ready, maybe I can fill it forever. Oh, I know you will always love Deborah, but I am willing to share your love if you are willing to share mine." I looked into her eyes. There was compassion, support, and, yes, love. Maybe I can handle it after all. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think, click to the next one.